In a world that often looks past the quiet ones, she noticed him, a boy who never spoke, yet said everything with his eyes. What she did next changed both their lives forever. If you believe that small acts can spark big miracles, like, comment, and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Because here, silence isn't ignored, it's understood. And kindness?
It speak loudest when the world goes quiet.
In the dusty stillness of Shady Springs, the morning sun slanted through warped blinds and weathered porch roofs like a faded memory. The town wasn't much, a scatter of one-story shops with chipping paint, sidewalks lined with cracked flower pots, and a single traffic light that worked only when it felt like it. Folks here knew each other's names but not their stories, and no one asked too many questions. Shady Springs didn't offer much, but it kept its rhythm, quiet and predictable, like the creak of screen doors and the hum of ceiling fans in summer. At the corner of Willow and 3rd stood the Hollow Bean Cafe, its windows fogged slightly from the inside, steam rising from fresh pots of coffee. The bell above the door gave a sleepy chime whenever someone entered, but most mornings it rang at the same time, for the same people. That's how it was in Shady Springs.
Prédictable.
Except for one thing. Amara Bell moved behind the counter like a pianist in slow rhythm, smooth, methodical, and almost invisible. Her dark curls were tied back in a no-nonsense bun, her uniform apron smudged from hours of wiping tables and refilling mugs. She didn't speak unless needed. She listened. And most important, she watched. Not in a suspicious way, but in the way someone does when they've once been invisible and know what it's like not to be seen. Every morning, like clockwork, a small figure slipped into the Hollow Bean and settled into the corner booth by the window. He never ordered, never asked, never even looked around. Just curled up, hoodie drawn tight over his thin frame, legs pulled onto the seat, and eyes, those wide, searching eyes, fixed somewhere beyond the glass as if waiting for a world that never quite showed up. His name, she'd later learn, was Noel. At first, the other customers ignored him. A few whispered, "Is that kid all right?" One older woman had asked, lowering her voice like he might shatter if she spoke too loud. "Looks like he wandered off from somewhere," a man muttered one morning. But no one did anything.
Except Amara.
She'd noticed how he flinched when the door slammed too hard. How his fingers twitched at the smell of scrambled eggs. How his stomach growled, so softly you might miss it, unless you were listening. Amara was always listening. So one day, without a word, she wrapped a sandwich, scrambled egg, a slice of ham, warm toast, and poured a small cup of milk. She placed it gently on a tray with a folded napkin and walked it over to him. He didn't look up at first. But then he gave the smallest nod, barely there, like a leaf shifting in wind, and she understood, "Thank you." And from then on, every morning was the same.
Before the rush.
Before Randy started yelling in the kitchen. Before the booths filled with retirees arguing over baseball stats and burnt toast. Amara would quietly make the same sandwich, the same milk, and place it at the corner booth where Noel sat. He never spoke. But he never missed a day. To the rest of the town, Noel was just the silent kid in the hoodie. But to Amara, he was more than that. He was familiar. Not by face, but by silence. And she knew what it meant when someone kept showing up, even without a voice. They were hoping someone might finally see them. The clatter of pans and the hiss of oil were just beginning to build in the Hollow Bean's narrow kitchen when Randy pushed through the swinging door, his stained apron flapping like a battle flag. The man was 60, maybe more, with a voice like gravel and a temper to match. Years of grease and missed chances had hardened him into someone who didn't believe in charity, especially not on his dime. He stood near the prep station, arms folded, watching Amara slide a tray onto the counter.
Toasted sandwich, warm milk. Sam every morning.
"Amara," he barked, jerking his chin toward the tray. "We need to talk." She didn't flinch, just looked up calmly and met his glare with one of her own. "After I take care of something," she said quietly. He waited just long enough to make his disapproval obvious, then followed her with heavy footsteps as she walked the tray to the corner booth and set it down in front of Noel. The boy didn't look up, but his fingers crept toward the sandwich with silent urgency. Amara gave a soft smile, then turned back toward the kitchen, where Randy now stood square in the doorway. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp as the knife clutched in his hand moments before. Amara folded her arms, voice even.
Feeding a hungry kid.
"With food that doesn't belong to you," he snapped. That sandwich could have been sold. That milk costs money. And that boy? He's not a paying customer. He's not a customer at all. She stepped forward. He's a child. Alone. Out there every morning like clockwork. You see him, Randy. Everyone sees him. You just choose not to care. Randy's jaw tensed. This is a business.
We don't run on warm feeling.
I've got bills, payroll, overhead. You want to play Mother Teresa, do it on your own time. I am, Amara said, her voice low but clear. Every morning.
Before the rush.
That food comes out of my tips. Not yours. He scoffed.
Tips don't pay for the lights.
You keep this up, we're going to have a problem. Maybe we already do. That stopped him. For a long second, neither of them moved.
Sommière out in the dîner, à forque clinked against ta plate.
Rain tapped the windows in irregular rhythm. Amara didn't look away. Randy leaned in, his voice softer but no less biting. You think giving a sandwich to some stray kid makes you a saint? He's not a stray, she said. He's a boy. And he's hungry.
What is next?
Free meals for everyone who walks in looking sad. If that's what it takes to remind us we're still human, maybe. Randy stared at her like she'd spoken a language he hadn't heard in years. Maybe he hadn't. You think he even notices, he muttered, turning back toward the kitchen. Amara's voice followed him like a quiet storm. I don't do it to be noticed. I do it because no one else will. He paused just long enough to show he'd heard her, but said nothing. It wasn't just the boy's silence that pulled at something inside Amara, it was the way he sat. Curled into himself. The way he looked like he wanted to disappear without making a sound. She recognized it not because someone had told her about it once, but because she had lived it. Long before the name on her badge said, Amara Bell, she was just file number 12 to 4819 in a foster system that forgot kids faster than it processed them. She had been shuffled from house to house like unwanted mail, each one colder than the last. Some places had rules that shouted louder than the people. Others had silence that made your skin crawl. But all of them had one thing in common. She was always the girl in the corner, eating quietly, trying not to be a bother. No one ever asked if she was okay. They asked if she washed her hands. If she did her homework.
If she'd stop crying at night.
But not if she was okay. She learned early that being invisible was safer. Quieter. If no one saw you, they couldn't hurt you. But even silence doesn't stop the hunger. And one day, it caught up to her. She was 10, sitting outside a thrift store with her backpack and a belly that hadn't known dinner in 2 days. She wasn't crying. She'd learned not to. But she stared hard at the window display where a plastic bowl of fake fruit sat, wishing she could chew the wax apple and not care that it tasted like paint. That's when Miss Patty found her. A retired schoolteacher with wiry gray curls and eyes like autumn. She didn't ask Amara what her name was. Didn't ask where her parents were. Just said, you look like you could use a warm bowl of soup. And it was just soup, tomato basil with a grilled cheese sandwich so crisp it crackled, but Amara had never tasted anything like it. Not because of the flavor, but because of what came with it. Kindness. Presence.
No conditions.
Just someone who saw her, sat across from her, and let her be. Miss Patty didn't become her foster parent. Didn't change the world. But she did something just as rare. She remembered Amara's name. Every time Amara passed by the shelter Miss Patty volunteered at, there'd be a smile, a seat, and a slice of something warm. That small act stayed lodged in her heart like a glowing ember. And years later, when Amara saw Noel, alone, mute, clearly hungry, something in her heart stirred and reached back in time. She didn't need to know his story. Didn't need to ask where he came from. She just knew, someone had to sit across from him and place food on the table without asking for anything back. Because once upon a time, someone had done that for her. So every morning, as she slipped the sandwich onto the tray and poured the milk, it wasn't pity. It was memory. It was promise. It was proof that kindness doesn't need a reason, it just needs a witness. The rain came before the sun did, cold, uninvited, and relentless. It lashed against the windows of the Hollow Bean Cafe, drumming a nervous rhythm that unsettled the usual calm. Inside, Amara moved like she always did, tray in one hand, warm sandwich and milk in the other, a folded napkin tucked just so. She glanced toward the corner booth before even stepping past the counter. But the booth was empty. Noel was gone.
Chiblinktons, Twis.
Maybe she was early. Maybe he was just running late. But the cup in her hand trembled slightly as she set it down. She looked out the fogged glass, pressed her palm against it, squinted through the streaks of water. Still no sign of that gray hoodie. The unease settled deep, like a rock in her gut. Something wasn't right. Noel never missed a morning. Not even when it snowed. Not even when the sidewalks were sheets of ice. She turned from the window. "Where's the kid?" one of the regulars mumbled, noticing the untouched tray. Amara didn't answer. "Amara," Randy called from the kitchen, his voice booming over the clatter of pans, "you planning on serving those hash browns any time this year?" She didn't respond. Her fingers moved quickly, untying her apron and tossing it onto the counter in one motion. The bell over the door chimed behind her as she shoved the door open and stepped into the storm. Rain hit her like ice. Within seconds her uniform was soaked through, her curls plastered to her cheeks. But she didn't stop. She ran. Down Main Street, past the bakery with its foggy windows, past the closed-up florist with the wilting mums. She checked behind the newsstand first. Nothing. Then she ducked into the alley behind Mitchell's Market, heart thudding, breath short. "Noel," she called, even though she knew he wouldn't answer. Couldn't. She searched the steps behind the old library, the church with the broken bell tower, even the gas station dumpster where he'd once sketched a bird on a pizza box lid. No sign.
Amara's sneakers splashed through deepening puddle.
Her lungs burned.
En shook.
She was soaked to the skin and trembling, not from the cold, but from something worse. A question that kept circling loud and brutal. What if he's gone? It had been 40 minutes. Maybe more. She was nearing the edge of town when she passed the old bus stop, an arched shelter with half its plastic panels broken or missing. She almost ran past it. But then she saw something small curled between the back wall and a pile of damp cardboard. She stopped. Froze.
Noel.
The figure didn't move.
Amara stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal.
Her heart was pounding now, loud in her ears. She knelt beside him, rain dripping from her elbows. He was soaked, hoodie clinging to his small frame, arms wrapped around his knees. In his lap was a piece of paper, colors smudged and running from the rain, barely holding the shape of two stick figures and a heart. "Oh baby," she whispered, reaching out. He flinched when she touched him, but didn't pull away. Just turned his face toward her, pale, cold, and wordless. His eyes met hers, wide and ashamed. "No, no," Amara said, pulling him into her arms, pressing his soaked frame against her chest. "You don't have to hide."
You Renault Talon.
Amara's apartment sat above the tailor's shop, 2 flights up and just big enough for one person who didn't own much. The carpet was worn but clean, the couch secondhand but soft, and the scent of cinnamon tea clung to the air like memory. She unlocked the door with one hand while holding Noel with the other, his small frame still pressed against her, his fingers tangled in the fabric of her coat like he was afraid to let go. Inside, she set him gently on the couch. He didn't speak, didn't shift, just sat there, shivering, eyes wide, holding onto the crumpled drawing as if it were the last thing he had. Amara didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "Where have you been?" or "Why didn't you come this morning?" She just knelt in front of him, placed a hand lightly on his knee, and said, "You're safe now, okay?" Then she stood, moved quietly toward the bathroom, and began to run the tub. She found an old hoodie of hers, soft and oversized, and a clean towel. When she returned, Noel was still frozen in place, water trailing from his sleeves, his eyes watching her every move. She held out her hand. He took it. The bathwater steamed gently as she knelt beside the tub, guiding him in like a mother would, slowly and carefully. He didn't flinch when the warm water touched his skin. Didn't resist when she used a washcloth to wipe the grime from his arms, his neck, his cheeks. His silence didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like trust. Afterward, she wrapped him in the towel, dried his hair with slow circular motions, then helped him into the hoodie. It swallowed him whole, but he didn't seem to mind. She led him back to the couch, tucked a blanket around his legs, and set a bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of him. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up the spoon. He ate slowly, methodically. Amara didn't sit beside him. She moved to the armchair across the room, giving him space, but keeping her gaze soft and steady. She didn't speak unless he looked up, and even then, it was only with her eyes. When he finished, he didn't say a word. Just set the spoon down gently and reached into the front pocket of his hoodie. From it, he pulled a small notebook. The pages were wrinkled from the rain, but still mostly intact. He opened to a blank sheet, selected a crayon from her coffee table, one of a dozen she kept in a mason jar, and began to draw. Amara didn't move. She watched in silence as his fingers glided across the page, slow at first, then more certain. Lines formed shapes. Shapes formed meaning. When he was done, he turned the notebook around. 2 stick figures. One taller, with curly hair. The other smaller, in a hoodie. They were holding hands, standing beneath a crooked sun. Between them was a bright red heart. Amara blinked back, a sudden sting in her eyes. Her hand reached out almost without thinking, fingers trembling slightly as she touched the page. "Is that us?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Noel nodded once. She smiled. "It's beautiful." It started with a low hum, barely more than a whisper across the early morning stillness. Amara was behind the counter, pouring sugar into the dispensers, her body still moving slow from the weight of yesterday. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the air held a kind of hush that only came before things changed.
The homme greloudait.
Chairs began to rattle on the tile floor. The windows trembled in their frames. Patrons at booths turned their heads toward the sound, forks frozen midair, coffee halfway to their lips. And then the sky split open. A sleek black helicopter descended into the diner's parking lot with military precision, its blades chopping the morning silence into sharp, vibrating pieces. Wind kicked up dust and paper from the sidewalks, spinning leaves into tiny storms. Every set of eyes inside the hollow bean was now plastered to the windows. Amara dropped the sugar dispenser. 3 black SUVs followed within seconds, pulling up in perfect synchronization behind the helicopter. Doors opened all at once. Men in dark suits and mirrored sunglasses stepped out, alert, scanning, speaking into earpieces. One of them pointed toward the diner. Inside, no one moved. The waitress stopped mid-order. The cook peeked through the pass-through window, his eyes wide. Even Randy, who usually barked about burnt toast and slow service, stood slack-jawed by the register. Then the back door of the middle SUV swung open. He stepped out slowly.
Gabriel Thorne.
Even in a town like Shady Springs, people knew that name. CEO of Oroscore, a tech empire that touched everything from smart homes to AI security systems. A man who graced the covers of Forbes, Time, and tech magazines alike. Impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal coat, his silvering hair combed back with effortless precision, he walked with a kind of presence that bent rooms without a word. But it wasn't power he carried that morning. It was something heavier.
Something human.
Amara didn't move. Her eyes locked on the man now approaching the diner's glass doors. He paused at the entrance, and one of the guards opened it for him.
The belle chimède, soft, surréal.
Every head in the room turned. He stepped inside. His eyes swept across the cafe, not in arrogance but in urgency. As if time was running out and he'd spent years chasing it. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but low and laced with exhaustion. "Is there a boy here?" he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of his words to settle, named Noel. For a long, still moment, no one spoke. The question hung in the air like smoke, thick, undeniable, and charged with something more than curiosity. Amara felt her breath catch in her throat. From behind the counter, she turned slowly, her eyes drifting to the corner booth. Noel had gone still. He hadn't eaten his sandwich. The crayon in his hand had rolled off the table and onto the floor. His shoulders were stiff, drawn tight. But it was his eyes, wide, alert, terrified, that gave him away. Gabriel Thorne saw it too. Their eyes met across the room. Noel, small and sunken into the booth, tried to disappear into the shadows. Amara's instincts kicked in without hesitation. She stepped out from behind the counter and moved to stand in front of him, not blocking but shielding. Her posture was calm, but her body stood firm, a human barrier made of quiet courage. Gabriel took a step forward, then stopped, as if sensing the line between presence and pressure. "I'm not here to hurt him," he said, his voice softer now, but still carrying weight. "I've been looking for him."
Amara S. lips parted, Bune wordcam.
Gabriel looked at her, then at Noel. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a piece of folded paper, edges worn, creases softened from too much handling. He unfolded it carefully and held it up. Amara recognized it instantly. It was one of Noel's first drawings. The one with the stick figures and the heart. The taller one had curls like hers. The smaller one wore a hoodie.
Gabrielle's voice craquait juste slightly.
This showed up last week at a non-profit I fund, one that works with at-risk kids through art.
No name.
No return address. Just a plain envelope, and this inside. He lowered the drawing slowly. Amara turned to Noel. The boy was watching, unmoving, eyes glossy. Gabriel continued. 5 weeks ago, we were in the mountains. Just a weekend getaway. Noel's nanny stepped outside for a moment to answer a call. A stray dog startled her. She fell, hit her head. When she came to, Noel was gone. He paused, pressing his hand briefly to his chest before dropping it. We called search and rescue within the hour. Helicopters, drones, bloodhounds. We combed every ridge, every trail. No signs. No prints. It was like he had vanished into the air. Amara's throat tightened. She glanced down. Noel had moved, his hand now rested gently against the hem of her shirt. I didn't believe he was gone, Gabriel said. I couldn't. Not really. So I kept funding the search. Quietly. Through different channels. And then last week, that drawing. He looked up at Amara again. I didn't know where it came from. But I recognized him. The shape of his eyes. The way he draws the hands holding on. I knew I had to find the person in that picture. Amara's heart beat loud in her ears. And now I have. Silence hung in the room, thick and aching. Every pair of eyes was now fixed on the small boy in the corner booth, the one whose world had been quiet for too long. Noel didn't move at first. He sat rigid, pressed into the corner like he wanted to melt into it, like if he stayed still enough, maybe the moment would pass him by. Gabriel Thorne stood only a few steps away, but the space between them felt vast, like a chasm carved by absence, guilt, and time. He didn't step closer. He didn't call out. He only waited, his eyes locked on the boy he hadn't seen in over a month. His hands trembled faintly at his sides. Amara stood between them, still and steady, her body turned slightly toward Noel, shielding but not hiding him. She didn't speak either. She just reached out and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. Noel's breathing was shallow. His fingers gripped the edge of the seat cushion, knuckles white. His hoodie, still damp around the cuffs, clung to his thin arms. He blinked once, then slowly looked up, not at Gabriel, but at Amara. Their eyes met. His bottom lip quivered, and a tremor moved through his shoulders. Then, with a sound so small it barely counted as a word, he whispered, "Mom."
Amara est brisiched.
She froze, unsure if she had imagined it. But Noel was moving now. Slowly, hesitantly, like every muscle in his body had to relearn how to trust the world. He stood. Took one shaky step. Then another. And then he collapsed into Amara's arms. She caught him with a gasp, wrapping her arms around his fragile frame. His face buried into her chest, and for the first time in all the weeks she had known him, his body wasn't guarded. It wasn't curled tight. It was open. Surrendered. Real. He clung to her. And then, he spoke again. "Mom."
This time loudé.
Clearer. Real. Amara couldn't stop the tears. She held him tighter, her hand cradling the back of his head as he shook in her embrace. "I'm here," she whispered into his hair. "I'm right here."
Behind them, Gabrielle's face craquait.
His lips parted, but no words came. He stepped back a half step, overwhelmed. The air around him shifted, less CEO, less billionaire, and more simply, a father. A man who had lost something precious and was just now seeing it, breathing, alive, in front of him. Tears welled in his eyes. He raised one trembling hand to his mouth and then lowered it again. "Thank you," he said softly to Amara, voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just keep him alive. You brought him back." Amara didn't respond, not with words. She just looked up at him, one hand still holding Noel, the other gently wiping tears from the boy's cheek. And in that moment, with the rain tapping quietly against the diner's windows, something larger than relief took root.
Something sacred.
A boy had found his voice. And with it, he'd called her mom. The days that followed felt softer, like the air itself had exhaled. The frenzy of helicopters and black SUVs was gone. So were the whispers and wide-eyed stares. Shady Springs returned to its quiet rhythm, but for Amara, everything had changed. Gabriel Thorne didn't take Noel away, not that day, not the next. Instead, he checked into the small inn across the street from the Hollow Bean Cafe, trading penthouse views for creaky floorboards and coffee brewed from an old drip machine. He didn't bring an entourage. No press, no cameras, no tailored entourage. Just himself, and a quiet determination to do things differently this time. Every morning, just after sunrise, he came into the diner. He never sat at the back. He chose the counter, close enough to watch, far enough to give space. He'd order black coffee, nothing more, and sit with his elbows resting on the chipped laminate, eyes never far from the corner booth where Noel now sat with Amara. Always beside her. Always reaching for her hand when the bell chimed or a door slammed too loud. Gabriel watched all of it. He watched how Noel began to color again, his drawings more confident, his lines less tentative. He watched how Amara would nod or smile without words, understanding what each color, each shape meant. He watched a bond unfold that was too deep to be taught, too honest to be mimicked. After a week, he walked with Amara down Main Street. Noel had run ahead, chasing a stray leaf blown across the sidewalk like a wild bird. Gabriel's hands were tucked into the pockets of his coat. His pace was slow, thoughtful. "I used to think I could give my son the world," he said, his voice quiet. "Private schools. Guards. Anything he needed. Except, the one thing he really did." Amara glanced sideways, but didn't interrupt. He stopped walking and turned to her. "You gave him life when I couldn't. You reached him in a way I didn't know how to anymore." She swallowed, unsure what to say. Gabriel hesitated for only a second longer, then added, Would you stay in his life? Not as help. Not as a memory. But as family." The words hit Amara harder than she expected. For a moment, she didn't breathe. She looked past Gabriel, to where Noel had paused near the steps of the library, crouched low and focused on something only he could see. Amara had spent her whole life being temporary. In foster homes. In jobs. In people's lives. No one had ever asked her to stay, not like this.
Not for good.
She turned back to Gabriel. "I don't know what that would look like," she said honestly. "It looks like what you're already doing," he replied. "You show up. You protect him. You know what he needs before he says a word. You've already built something with him. I'm just asking if we can build it together." She didn't answer right away. But when Noel looked up and waved, his whole face lighting up when he saw them together, something shifted in her chest. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "But only if this is about him. Not about ownership. Not about roles." Gabriel smiled. "It's about love," he said. "Nothing more." 6 months later, what once stood as a crumbling, abandoned community hall at the edge of Shady Springs had been transformed into something bright, breathing, and new. Where weeds once choked the concrete steps, flowerbeds now bloomed. Where the windows had been shattered, stained glass panels cast soft light across freshly painted walls. The sign above the double doors read simply, Lightwell Center. It had been Gabriel's idea at first, spoken one afternoon while watching Noel trace butterflies in the dirt with a stick. "What if we made something out of this?" he'd said. "Not just for him. For all of them."
The key ones. The lost ones.
Amara had said yes. Not out of obligation, but because the vision echoed something she hadn't let herself dream in years. They used Gabriel's money. But they used Amara's heart. Lightwell became a space for children like Noel, those who spoke in drawings instead of sentences, who flinched at raised voices, who needed time and warmth instead of pressure and perfection. There were easels and crayons and therapy rooms with soft pillows and shelves full of picture books. There were murals painted by the kids themselves, wild with color and unafraid of mistakes. And in the very center of it all, physically, emotionally, was Amara. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She didn't wear an apron or balance plates or dodge fry oil. She wore a name badge now, Director, Lightwell Center. But the badge wasn't what made people follow her. It was her presence. Steady, kind, intentional. She remembered every child's name, their favorite colors, what foods made them nervous, who needed a nightlight in the nap room and who only painted with purple. Parents whispered about her in parking lots, not with suspicion, but reverence. She sees them, they'd say. Really sees them.
Noël m'évridait.
He had his own corner in the art room, his own box of crayons, always arranged in perfect rainbow order. He helped younger kids find the color they wanted when they didn't know how to ask. He laughed now. Not constantly, not loudly, but he laughed. And when he wasn't drawing, he was walking beside Amara like her shadow, quieter but just as present. Gabriel kept his promise too. He didn't hover, didn't dominate. He stopped by a few times a week, sometimes for meetings, sometimes just to sit in the back garden and watch the kids run. He brought ideas, resources, connections. But more than that, he brought his willingness to learn, to stay, to show up. And slowly, Lightwell became more than a building. It became a movement. A statement in this tiny town that children mattered, not for their grades or behaviors, but for their hearts. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the west windows, Amara stood in the center's main hall and looked around. Children painting, laughing, quietly creating their own kind of healing. She smiled. This wasn't just redemption. It was legacy. The Lightwell Center was buzzing with life, but today, it shimmered with something more, celebration. Paper lanterns floated from the rafters, twisting gently in the breeze from the open windows. Streamers, uneven but joyful, curled down from doorframes and chairs. Children ran through the halls with frosting on their noses and handmade party hats tilted sideways. In the back garden, where once there had only been weeds, cupcakes sat in neat rows beside pitchers of lemonade. It was Noel's birthday. 1 year ago, he had been silent, voiceless in the corner booth of a small-town diner. Now he stood at the center of a room full of color and sound, surrounded by people who didn't just see him, they cherished him. Amara stood to one side of the room, her crown of construction paper slightly askew, a gift from the littlest kids who had insisted she wear it. Gabriel stood beside her, hands folded, eyes trained on the boy they both now called family. Noel stood in front of the cake, 12 small candles flickering atop white frosting. He looked different now, not just healthier but lighter, like something inside him had finally been set free. The crowd hushed. Dozens of small voices began to sing, soft at first, then louder, "Happy birthday to you." When the final note faded, everyone waited for the blowout. But Noel didn't lean forward. Instead, he turned and walked slowly to the front of the room, where a small microphone rested on a stand, barely adjusted to his height. Someone had set it there earlier, just in case. He picked it up with both hands. The room went silent again, holding its collective breath. He cleared his throat. A soft crackle echoed through the speakers. "Last year," he began, his voice clear and steady, "I didn't have a voice." A hush fell deeper, reverent. "I didn't make a wish on my birthday. I didn't think anyone would hear me if I did." He looked down for a moment, then back up, his eyes shining. "But this year, I don't need to wish." He paused, and everyone leaned in. "Because everything I could wish for is already here." His gaze shifted across the crowd, then landed on Gabriel. "I have a dad, who never stopped looking for me." Then to Amara. "And a mom, who found me before I could find myself." The room was still, a heartbeat frozen in time. "I don't need to wish," Noel said again, softer now. "Because I already have a family." Amara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his breath caught somewhere between pride and something deeper. Around them, the children clapped first, small hands hitting together in erratic rhythm, then the adults, until the whole room echoed with warmth and celebration. Noel smiled, stepped down from the makeshift stage, and walked straight into Amara's waiting arms. Gabriel joined them, one arm around each, pulling them into a quiet, tearful hug. In that moment, the three of them weren't a miracle. They were something even rarer. They were chosen. The garden behind Lightwell glowed under the soft blush of late afternoon. Golden light spilled across the grass, catching on wind chimes and wildflowers, painting everything in hues of warmth and promise. Children darted between planter beds, laughter trailing like ribbons in the breeze. Someone was playing gentle music from a portable speaker, just soft enough to feel like the background to something sacred. Amara stood near the herb boxes, her hands dusted with soil from helping a group of little ones plant basil earlier. She wore a soft yellow sweater, her curls loosely tied back, and her cheeks still pink from all the hugs she'd received during Noel's birthday celebration. She didn't see Gabriel at first. Not until the chatter around her quieted just slightly, just enough for her to notice the shift in energy. He was walking across the garden path, holding something in both hands, a small box wrapped in a cloth napkin, the kind they used for picnics. Noel trailed just a few steps behind him, a bouquet of dandelions and violets cradled against his chest. "Hey," Gabriel said gently as he reached her. Amara smiled. "Hey yourself." He looked around, eyes sweeping across the children, the center they'd built, the life they'd somehow stumbled into together. Then his gaze landed on her and didn't leave. "I used to think I knew what fulfillment looked like," he said, voice steady. "Boardrooms. Applause. Billion-dollar deals." He stepped closer. "But nothing has felt like this. Like hearing Noel laugh. Like watching you teach a room full of kids how to paint joy with their bare hands. Like seeing a lost boy find a home." He dropped slowly to one knee. Gasps flitted up from a group of kids peeking from the patio. Amara froze. Gabriel opened the box. Inside sat a simple, elegant ring, nothing flashy, just meaningful. Along the inside of the band, a phrase shimmered in tiny engraving, "Where love found us, we stayed." Gabriel looked up, eyes filled with something vast and vulnerable.
You saved my son, Amara.
"But you saved me too. You reminded me that family isn't built by inheritance or tradition. It's built by choice. By love. By showing up." He reached for her hand. "Will you marry me, and help me build a life where love isn't something we stumble into, but something we protect every single day?" Noel stepped forward then, his eyes wide and glowing. He pressed the flowers into Amara's hand and whispered with a grin, "Say yes, Mom." She laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief, and dropped to her knees beside Gabriel. Her hands trembled as she touched his cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that more than anything." Cheers erupted from every corner of the garden. Children squealed and clapped. The staff cried quietly by the flower trellises. And there, in the middle of a garden planted by small hands and healed hearts, 3 people embraced, not because fate had brought them together, but because they had chosen to stay together. Some stories don't begin in hospitals or family trees. Some begin with a warm meal, a drawing left behind, and a whisper that says, "Mom." If this journey touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, where every act of kindness becomes a legacy, and every silent voice deserves to be heard.